business. Welcome to Down to Business with V, a show dedicated to bringing you actionable information to help protect you, your families, your businesses, and the community. I'm your host, V, and today we're discussing doxing and swatting. To bring awareness to the issue, I have in the studio with me via Zoom, Rachel Gibson. Rachel is the director of the Center for Victim Service Professionals at the National Center for Victims of Crime. Welcome, Rachel.
Good morning. Thank you all for having me.
Wonderful. Thank you for being here. So, Rachel, before we get into the topic today, tell us a little bit about the National Center for Victims of Crime and your role there.
Sure. So the National Center was started over 35 years ago. We're actually celebrating our 35th anniversary this year. And our center was founded because the founder's mother, Sonny Von Bulow, who was a socialite in New York, was a victim of crime. And it was during this criminal justice process that the family, discovered that they weren't receiving the best services possible. They were not treated well through that process. And so it was during that experience that they had that they decided that there needs to be a national presence, a national voice who can speak for victims of crime, not only, with legislators and lawmakers, but helping survivors and victims navigate the criminal justice process. And so out of that experience, our center was birthed. And we pride ourselves on serving all victims of crime. For those of us who do victim services work, we know that there are domestic violence hotlines, sexual assault hotlines, human trafficking hotlines. There's a hotline for many types of victimization. But in our research and our understanding of crime, we know that victims can be experiencing all types of crime. So I may be a victim of domestic violence, also experiencing identity fraud. I could be a victim of human trafficking while also being stalked. And so we serve all victims of crime, whatever their journey, whether it be the beginning of the process or even maybe they have experienced crime years ago and they still are processing that. And so we have our national Victimconnect Hotline that serves all victims, that helps them through that process, that gives them the resources and supports that they need. We also have our VAST Center, which is our Victims Assistance Serving Tribes, which focuses on tribal communities. We know that there are over 500 federally recognized tribes, and we understand that crime affects this particular community quite differently than some of the counterparts. We understand that missing and murdered Indigenous women are often not given the same sort of national presence as other missing folks. And so we work with our VAST Center to provide Indigenous and tribal communities the resources and support that they need. In my particular center, we work with victim service professionals, whether they be court professionals, advocates, law enforcement, legal professionals, to get them training and technical assistance. So training meaning there are tons of topics out there like doxing and swatting where they may not be familiar with it. And that's where we can provide them with expertise. And then technical assistance, which is a you've got questions, we've got answers sort of deal, where if they're working with service providers or victims or survivors and they need help thinking something through, we can come in and provide them with our expertise and insight. And then we have some of our other centers, like our research and innovation, where we understand that crime victim data is often not available, especially when we think about communities of color or communities that are typically at the margins, where we can do really good ethical data collection. Many times communities have a distrust of the criminal justice system, and rightly so. And so we want to be able to go into communities, gather data, but also not just gather that data, but then give it back to the communities to use it to help better their community, to get supports built, to get resources to victims and survivors. And so our Center for Research Innovation works closely with all of our other programs to make sure that our data collection is done in a meaningful and honest way. And so those are just some of our national level projects and centers that we have at the National Center. And, we are definitely excited to be here. I want to bring greetings on behalf of our executive director, Renee Williams, who couldn't be here but is excited to be a part of these conversations. And we just want to let your listeners know, like I said, that we have our Victimconnect hotline that is for anyone, any type of crime, even if you don't know if you've been a victim, because we know that to be true, that oftentimes victims don't know that they are victims of crime. And so if you think something might have happened or went on, feel free to reach out to us and we're able to provide you with that support. And then lastly, we do a lot of work with legislators and community leaders around how do we begin these conversations. We have a system, a criminal justice system that was built, but we know that it needs some work. It needs some improvement. And so how do we make the system we have work better, work right, work correctly for victims of crime? And how do we begin those conversations when we think about laws and statutes? We'll talk a little bit about that with doxing, especially when we think about how internet-based crimes are kind of far ahead of some of our laws and statutes, but that's not to say that there aren't really good laws on the books that can be used. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about how do we make the system work for victims and survivors, as well as supporting victim service professionals as they support victims and survivors.